First of all, let me deal with one point. I agree with you that teaching has always been stressful, and teaching in the classroom for 15 years, it was incredibly stressful, and always that was part of the job, because you're dealing with people, and dealing with children is stressful. In terms of relentless testing, I think we have to go back, step back and say, well, what is SATS about? SATS is about giving government important information, measurements of how children are doing across the nation. And if we take them out, we're then left we're left with sort of generalised impression marking in classrooms, and we have no accurate measure of what's really going on. Well, you can't really fail it. I mean, basically, you either exceed national standard, you work at national standard, or you're working. Yes, you're working towards national standard, and of course that's important information to know. Teachers need to be clear how their children are performing against other children in other schools, and head teachers need that information.
Why do they need to know that?
Well, because I believe that we need to know nationally why. Or what's actually happening in schools. We can't have some schools...
At the expense of putting such a degree of pressure on children in primary school?
Let me deal with
there are 4 different opportunities for SATs in primary school.
Dr.
4, that's too many, way too many.
Let Dr. Cohen answer your point.
Okay, the main one occurs at the end of year 6, which I believe is...
That's the one that a third fail.
Yes, and that's really crucial that we have information at that point.
Why?
Well, let me tell you why. I taught in the secondary system for over 9 years, and when I was in the secondary system, one of the problems we had is we didn't have information about the children coming to us. It was all generalised, because when I was working in the system we had no SATS measurements. So the first thing we had to do in year 7 was give them a SATS test. That's exact, and they're only a few months older than they were in the end of year 6. And the very first thing we did was to conduct what we called Richmond tests, so that we could set the children and we knew exactly where they were. But the thing also that happens is when you don't test, I believe that in a way there's a lack of accountability, and that is a big problem. Accountability, now that not for many teachers are, and many head teachers are absolutely honest and straightforward, and I know that, and I'm not questioning their judgment. But I'm just saying that accountability is an important thing in all industries across the world. There is accountability, and teachers must be accountable. The interesting thing is that since SATS has been introduced, there's been an increased performance. We know that many children going into university right now and going through the later stage of university have terrible English and terrible maths. And as a university teacher myself, having taught there, I can vouch for that.
Yes, because they spend too much time being prepared for tests.
Absolutely.
There's not enough time for learning.
Okay, many of those students actually have not experienced SATS. They are post-SATS. SATS really, in the form that we're now seeing, has only been in place since 2014. Well, I do believe that teaching is a vocation, and a lot of people train to be teachers, but then find they want to go and do other things. And
40%?
Yes, we often find, one of the interesting things that I discovered when I was working in schools is that when the economy improved, people would often leave the profession for better paid jobs. And a lot of teachers are, they're very well qualified people, and they can go out and find other work. And the teaching profession is not as well paid because you're working for the state as many other professions. So that's one of the reasons people go. Well, they are professional people. If you look amongst the professions, that's actually quite a low salary. Depending on, if you're comparing it to people who are unskilled, yes, that is a higher salary, I agree. Although you'll also find that people living in London and in the south would really struggle to survive on a salary of 37,000. To buy a house or whatever, they would have to have a partner.
Indeed, teaching turnover is much higher in the south than the north.
And that, I think, is part of that problem. Stress is an issue. I mean, even before SATs, a long time before
it's
SATs,
not just
it
SATs.
was
It's not just
stressful. Well, I think it's always good when people are rewarded or appreciated, and children used to give me presents, but it wasn't to do with stress. It's just because they were grateful for what I was doing. So, but I wouldn't want to say that teachers are any more stressed than many other people in our society. So maybe we should be giving presents to lots of people. To remove all difficulty or all obstacles to people is not a good thing, because that's how we learn, that's how we toughen up, by being put under pressure. Now, I agree that it's not intolerable pressure that we should be put under, but we do need to be put under some level of pressure for us to perform. And I don't think, personally, doing a series of tests at the end of Year 6 is a problem. I really don't. I think if we got rid of them, we'd have other problems. I was teaching up until the mid-90s, but about 2000. However, I can tell you it was just as stressful then as it is now. It's never been a place that doesn't have stress. And I can remember, working for, 50, 60, 70 hours a week, and there were no SATs then. It was just a difficult job. Okay, we take all that out and we get rid of everything, and people are very happy. And then suddenly all the standards fall, and then we have enormous pressure again coming from people saying,
what
evidence
is there that standards will fall if you remove SATs?
Well, the evidence is that when we've toughened up the curriculum, and I was involved in helping with that, we've actually improved performance amongst children. Their standards have gone up. Their standard of English and maths has improved. Well, some schools may have put more time into those subjects, but I don't believe that is true of every school.
Correlation is not causation, is it? You can't say that SATs have improved performance.
No, you can't make a direct correlation, although we do know that since the curriculum has been toughened up and SATs are linked to that curriculum, standards have improved. Now that is something we should be celebrating. Now, let's go to Singapore. They have a really tough curriculum. They have tests. And if we're going to compete on a national scale with countries like Singapore and other jurisdictions that have wonderful maths and English, we need to recognise that we cannot compete on the international stage. And if we lose that, economically, we will be further back, because the children that we have in our schools are our economic future. And if we do not invest in them and make sure that the standards are high, we will in the end find that we're going down the economic scale and we won't be able to afford the education. Even there'll be more budget cuts than you've got now. As I just said, we had to test them in secondary school, but we were picking up the problem. And we couldn't do anything about it. I mean, at that point, people in primary schools, if they know that their children are facing a test, they'll think, you know what, I think these children need to know their times tables. The children I was receiving in secondary school, I could have tested them and said 12 times 12, they wouldn't have a clue. Now that's what I was experiencing in secondary school without SATs. Is that right? There's always an upside and a downside. Obviously, we must protect children. I believe that we must look after and ensure that their mental health is good. Pressure should not be intolerable. It should be significant enough to produce results, but not intolerable. So I agree. I'm not necessarily saying the Singapore system is good. I'm just saying...
We were citing it as good a minute ago.
Well, no, but I mean in terms of the level of stress, it is good in terms of performance, and we have evidence of that because their economy is performing so well, and ultimately we have to ensure that children reach their potential. That's not going to be easy. What I'm concerned about, let me just say this, is in primary schools, if we let go of SATs, we could see this thing spiralling again, and we don't have any way of ensuring that children going through primary sector education are learning the things that they need to learn, and we don't have the problem in secondary schools, because to be honest, the problem has never really been in the secondary system. Not really, because secondary teachers are subject specialists, but they can only deliver history if a child knows English. Maths is needed for chemistry, IT, it's needed for physics. If you don't have a solid grasp of the basics, and that's what we're looking for, that's what SATS does, it says, how well are you doing on the basics? That's what we need to know in primary school. We cannot learn that in secondary school. It's not the place to do it. SATs means standardised assessment testing, not just testing. Because if you can test people, but unless you've compared it with what other people are doing, you don't really know how well your kids are doing. I'm not saying teachers can't assess children as they go along. They can, but one person's assessment is different from another person's, is different from another person's. You've got to be able to compare them and say, well, what's really happening there compared to here? And is that performance good enough? We need to know this information.